It's the Josh and Josh Talk Wrestling Podcast with your hosts, Josh.
And Josh!
And we're talking wrestling.
We are talking lots of wrestling today.
Today we are going to take a look at a what-if scenario. For anybody unfamiliar or anybody who missed the last what-if episode we did, shame on you. But the concept is we take a look back at something important in wrestling history, and we look at how it actually turned out, or how it was booked, or whatever. And we say, well, what if it went a different way? Kind of like Marvel Comics does that. They say, what if Spider-Man's Uncle Ben had never died? How would have things turned out differently? So we're going to do that today, and we're going to take a look at what if Tony Schiavone had never uttered those famous words on the January 4th episode of Nitro in 1999 that Mick Foley was going to win the belt, giving away WWE's main event in an attempt to dissuade viewers from watching, but instead 700,000 people changed the channel to WWE Raw because of what Tony Schiavone said.
Just to check, but first and foremost, we love you, Tony. I'm a huge Tony Schiavone fan. I know he always oversold everything. It could be a random WCW Thunder, and it would be the greatest show you've ever seen. Fans, you're tuning in to see a show better than any WrestleMania.
Oh yeah,
and it would just be the same thing. So he always did oversell everything, but to me, it's always better to oversell something than undersell something. But that being said, like, that was a huge part of my childhood growing up. I mentioned before I'll just say it right now. I was kind of inept as a kid, kind of weird and shy, and didn't have a whole lot of friends. And it sounds weird, but wrestling was kind of a thing there for me. I loved it. I thought that, wow, I love the action aspect of it. I love the storytelling aspect of it. And Tony Schiavone, with WCW, of course, the things they were doing with him and Bobby the Brain Heenan, they did some great stuff on the mic. So that was some of my earlier times remembering wrestling. So yeah, Tony Schiavone, we love you. But yeah, we're going to talk about that. But before we get to that, we have some big news. Moving on up. Dude, we're getting new microphones.
So no
more of this iPad stuff. We're actually going to have microphones for our podcast on our next podcast, which is 2 weeks from today. Isn't that awesome?
That's right, folks. Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, we're just sitting in my living room right now talking into an iPad, and it's kind of terrible. I'm craning my neck and my back to try and project into this iPad.
Everyone, he's joking. We're in a studio in the loop. He's joking. He's completely joking. It's this jokester. We're in a studio in the West Loop.
Oh my gosh! If we were paying for a studio in the West Loop somewhere, and this is the quality of work we were getting, we would be getting.
Starting off small, but we're in the West Loop.
But anyway, folks. So yeah, next time you hear us, hopefully we're gonna have a lot better quality. I think everything's gonna be a lot better. We're moving on up.
Yeah, and thank you all to subscribing to our page. And we had a blast at Logan Square Auditorium a couple weeks back. Of course, AEW had a show there. We saw ACA, Trevor Lee. We saw them depart, but they're heading to WWE's Performance Center, so we're going to see great things from them down the road. But in 2 weeks from now, if you don't have your tickets already, I think there's some standing room tickets available. But Logan Square Auditorium 2 weeks from today. So let's get to this topic. I think first and foremost, you brought up a really good point, Josh, pre-show, and I'll turn it over to you here in a second. But you brought up the point that it's sort of in this WWE revisionist way of looking at things, which it exists.
Yes, for sure. Oh, yes.
But hey, history is written by the victors, which WWE is the victor, so it makes sense. But Tony Schiavone, at least in most people's minds, sort of see him as kind of like the catalyst, the guy that broke WCW.
So that's the thing. When Tony gave his speech blowing the results of an episode of Monday Night Raw on January 4th, 1999, a lot of people point to that as the specific turning point in the Monday Night Wars where WWF was able to surge ahead. That's not really the case. I looked it up, and WWE had actually started to surge ahead with, I think it was 9 consecutive weeks winning against Nitro before this happened, and then before that there were even a few sporadic moments where they had beaten Nitro before. You could still point to January 4th, 1999 as almost symbolic of things, because after that it really took off. Here's what happened. For weeks before this, at the behest of Eric Bischoff, or sometimes Eric Bischoff himself would do this, they would blow results of Raw episodes because it was pre-taped, or they were able to find out because of a delay or whatever. And this particular weekend, Tony Schiavone said the following.
If you're even thinking about changing the channel to our competition, fans, do not. Because we understand that Mick Foley, who wrestled here one time as Cactus defend their world title. Gonna put some butts in the seat.
So after he said that, according to Nielsen ratings, approximately 700,000 people, 700,000 people did do just that. They turned the channel because that is something that they wanted to see. And then apparently a lot of them came back to Nitro because Raw ended slightly before Nitro and caught the last few minutes of Nitro, which implies that if Tony Schiavone had not opened his mouth, if he had not blown the results, they probably would have won that week against Raw. Now the question then becomes, would this have really affected things in the long run? Would this have really, changed the way the Monday Night Wars was going? I'd say not so much.
I think WCW was really slowly dying for quite some time. Diamond Dallas Page had mentioned that what WCW lacked was really innovation.
That's for sure.
They had some homegrown talent. Obviously, you look at like Goldberg, you look at like Sting, and I mean the NWO wasn't really exactly a new idea. But you look at they had some good ideas, but they weren't able to innovate like WWE. And WCW was able to secure contracts, but on the flip side, you look at what happened when they got Bret Hart.
Nothing.
Someone that was established.
Yeah.
We're talking a legend, Hall of Famer, and they couldn't do anything with it. So I think ultimately it's like, that did not help anything in terms of Tony Schiavone said. But I think just that alone, the innovation, which is really what wrestling's all about.
Yeah. I'd say innovation and adaptability. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you try one guy with a gimmick, it doesn't work out. WWE was really good at just try something else. Right. Try a different gimmick until it hits.
Look at Dolph Ziggler.
Yeah.
Cheerleader. He was a caddy at one point.
Yeah.
And then it was, the show off. Yeah, again, it's one of those things, it doesn't work the first time. You got to keep trying it. But, you think about Dolph Ziggler in WCW, he would have been a caddy for quite some time.
Oh, I'm sure. Because, they're not able to switch gears in such a way. For whatever reason, they just didn't have it.
Well, I've heard how unprofessional WCW was backstage. Where WWE, there's, obviously the gorilla spot. There's all these different spots kind of leading up to your entrance. And so WWE is able to map that out. They have that infrastructure in place. It's very professional. Where WCW, people are obviously getting drunk and high and stoned before matches, which I'm not going to judge people, but you probably shouldn't be smoking up or getting drunk before a match.
I wouldn't want to go up against anybody in that condition.
Right. But the thing is, like, when you have creative control, when it was the NWO, which, I was listening to one of Scott Hall's podcasts, and he was talking about how, like, they would go to their locker room, like the A locker room with, like, the NWO, and there would just be, like, just tons of beer. There would just be just beer all over the place, and you could just grab a beer if you wanted to. And, there's that's why Scott Hall didn't wrestle a lot of the time, since he'd get too drunk pre-show and wouldn't come out and wrestle. So they'd say, Kevin Nash, I'll go out and take a spot. And then, Kevin Nash didn't want to wrestle. Someone else, they'd send out, Virgil or Vincent or something, or someone to do something.
Throw whatever's available out there,
right. So you always had that, too. So it was one of those things where, it's Kevin Nash economics, maximum payment, minimum effort, which some would probably disagree with. But again, at the end of the day, most companies are maximum effort, minimum payment. So really, it's you kind of want to sort of, between an employee and an employer, sort of find your common ground there. Anyway, I know I'm going on a tangent, but just trying to explain where Kevin Nash is coming from. In the sort of the macro of things, it doesn't help the situation, because when you have the inmates running the asylums, they run their own contracts. They're making great money. They can make these choices.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the issue you have. So this is, again, all these things. I think that Tony Schiavone in WWE's revisionist way is sort of looked at as you mentioned, the catalyst, but there's so many other things that sort of led up to it as well. And I think the big thing was, okay, they came up with this idea. Well, again, they didn't really come up with the idea of the NWO. It wasn't a new idea, as Chris Jericho's mentioned. Something that was actually pulled from Japan, I think he had mentioned.
Yeah, it was, yeah. But it was fresh for us.
It was fresh for us, yeah. But we've seen these types of things, too, before, like with the $1 Million Corporation, with Camp Cornette, where they're like, we want to run the, we want all the titles. The difference is this, that, we want the titles. The NWO is like, we want to just destroy, take over the Federation itself.
From the outside. I think that's where the mystique came from.
Right. Well, from the quote-unquote outside.
The outsiders,
You're right. No, you bring up a good point. But I think that the main issue was there was no exit strategy. WWE is great, and what they do is that any storyline they produce, they squeeze as much juice out of that orange as possible. Mm-hmm. And they always have some type of, if they don't have an exit strategy, they make sure there is some type of strategy for the most part. There are some, we'll talk about, you remember the Mass Kane and Kane? That whole thing, like they just didn't explain that.
It was like,
fizzled
out.
What?
But there was a conclusion. I think he kicked him out the emergency back door or something, and that was it,
But
right?
that's not a.
I mean,
that's
just
it's a conclusion. But like the night before, the guy he kicked out the emergency door, the masked Kane, beat him in a match cleanly.
I know, and we never figured it out, and we never found it out, and it was
so
a
there's
cop-out.
this other guy out there dressed as Kane running around.
Theoretically, for a decade or two, right? No, as terrible as it was, you got unending.
but yeah, so back to my point,
Anyway.
The NWO,
right?
There was never really an exit strategy because, like, okay, so the NWO takes over WCW. What happens from there?
And then what? Yeah,
right. What happens? And that's kind of where I think the original idea of, again, sort of the rumor was the original idea of Thunder was that was going to be the NWO show. So you actually literally had quote unquote two federations in one.
I see.
Again, it's one of those things where it's like, what would be the fun of watching NWO if they're not taking over something?
Because there's no conflict there. They won.
Right. And I guess the idea was like, well, that's when they had the Civil War with the Wolf Pack. And there's actually, they had wanted to go break it out into 4 different groups. There was the LWO, which was kind of loosely connected to NWO.
Okay, yeah.
And then for a while there was some yellow NWO shirts floating around. What it was is actually Scott Hall was going to run his own. So you're going to have Kevin Nash run the Wolf Pack, Hogan would run NWO Hollywood, and then as far as Hall was going to run his own thing. But of course they couldn't trust him. You can't have a guy run it if he can't be the world champion. And that's why Scott Hall was never world champion. You can never really trust him. You can never really depend on him. Which is too bad because I've always been a huge fan of Scott Hall. Mainly more of his work as Razor Ramon in WWE.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, I think these are all these reasons you look at. It was innovation. It was just how there was a lack of infrastructure and professionalism in WCW. And then they didn't have an exit strategy. And they again, getting back to my first point, they couldn't innovate then after that exit strategy.
They didn't know where to take anything. I mean, yeah, like you started talking about like the LWO, you get the BWO at some point, Wolfpack.
Well,
right,
BWO was more ECW, but yeah.
You know what I mean? It was just too damn much. It was gonna fall apart no matter what with that. And then you get things like you said the creative control is just out of control. You get the finger poke of doom.
Well,
you get all kinds of.
Yeah,
I mean that can be its own episode on its own.
Oh, the figure, but dude, I mean that's the whole thing. To your point there, that was like one of the most disgusting things ever. And at the time, I didn't really realize it. It was one of those things where, in hindsight, you have this world title that had roots back to 1905.
Yeah,
and all they were trying to do was basically they were mocking DX. When DX did the same thing with the European title, when Shawn Michaels laid down for Triple H,
right.
Thing is, that was the European title that had maybe about a year history at that point. We're talking about a world title that's been around for almost a century at that point. And you think of all the greats that held that title and just to be like washed out like that. So yeah, you see the finger poke of doom. You see that David Arquette hold the title, and that's something just to be honest, David Arquette didn't want to hold it.
Yeah, he was against
sort of,
it. Yeah,
he sort of roped into it. But so you see those types of things, and again, it's just everyone wants to blame Tony Schiavone. I don't think everyone wants to blame necessarily. I think that against that revisionist way of WB is like Tony Schiavone is the one that destroyed everything.
Right.
There were so many other things besides that, and I really think Tony Schiavone in some ways is sort of revised as a Steve Bartman of WCW.
Poor guy.
We love you, Tony.
We love you, Tony. Wherever you are, wearing a Hawaiian shirt somewhere.
Yeah, he was a commentator, I believe, for the Braves quite a while, and I think maybe a couple of years. Yeah, he did a lot of work. So he did have a career afterwards. It was not like he did anything, but I remember on that final Nitro, that was that simulcast. It was so interesting to watch that. Because obviously that was the night where WWE ultimately won. Yeah. And it sort of opened up on both WWE and WCW with Vince McMahon. And it was so interesting to watch the WCW side of things, the commentary that night, because they were just letting loose. I remember at one point where Tony Schiavone was like, oh, how can he say that? How can Vince McMahon say that? And at one point when Regal was on Raw, of course, Nitro, they're watching the whole thing, and Regal was on Raw at this point. William Regal said something like, oh, Vince, why don't you just destroy Nitro? Why don't you go ahead and just throw it away, that garbage filled man? He said something along those lines. And when it cut back over to Tony Schiavone is like, wow, you know what? We've done a lot of crazy things, like put your ass over. And it was like, to hear that stuff, like, this is, again, before, like, CM Punk. And so breaking the fourth wall wasn't and I guess there was the curtain call, which was big, but without the internet, the curtain call was big, but it could have been even bigger with the internet at that point. But of course, if the internet was around, something else would have broke the wall before that, probably, right?
Sure.
So
yeah.
But yeah, I remember watching and being like, wow, that's interesting. You just don't see that type of breakage of that wall. So
yeah.
But yeah, it was At the end of the day, WWE won. Definitely not Tony's fault. That may not have helped things, but at the end of the day, as we just explained, there's probably 4,000 other things that ultimately destroyed WCW, which is a bummer. But, we've seen some competition sort of bubble up. Of course, we've always had the independent circuit, which has been a huge alternative for fans. And Triple H is really smart and decided to cash on. That's really what NXT is. It's the competition, the independent circuit. It's not only that, it's the direct conduit to WWE. It's a way to prep people, get them groomed and ready for the big leagues. But it does just that. It does compete, because it is independent wrestling, essentially, what NXT is. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you think about the different competitions with NXT, sort of with the independent circuit competition. You got Ring of Honor, which is done. They've got a smaller TV deal, but it's always, it's been good to see them as far as kind of a prosper a little bit more over the years. TNA has been something that's was good. They tried for 1 week. They had a live show. They took on WWE. They scared WWE enough to where they had to bring back Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and have a promo. This is post Montreal Screwjob.
Yes.
So that's when they had it. They brought him back to sort of offset that. But basically, TNA, they had one night where it was all live, and it was essentially it was a head count. This is like, it was a showcase. It was like, hey, here's the toys we have. Oh, we have Jeff Hardy. Oh, we also have Ken Anderson. Oh, remember the Outlaws? Mm-hmm. We have them too. Mm-hmm. It's like, great. But, what's actually going on here? And then the week after that, it was taped, and it just went downhill from there. We need some legitimate competition again, because I think that's what makes wrestling good. It's what makes anything good. If you have a monopoly,
right?
If you only have one thing, that one thing is going to rest on its laurels, and you're going to get, probably some entertainment. I feel like I'm getting some entertainment from WBE, but speaking of the Monday Night Wars, they were so much better. It was so much more innovative. It was so much more exciting.
They had to be.
They had to fight.
Every week they had to be.
Scratching and clawing. Right. And that's where they need to get that.
Yeah.
And I think that there hasn't been legitimate competition, with the exception of a 1 week from TNA, until maybe in the past couple weeks. All Elite Wrestling. It's backed by a billionaire. They want to be fresh. They want to focus on independent stars. They've got the backing. They've got a following so far. Although here's the thing, they've done one show, and I don't know about their iPay-per-view.
Oh, how successful that
how
was.
Successful it was. I imagine it was well, but I know they sold out. Of course, their first show in Chicago, and they have their second show coming up, Double or Nothing, and that's coming up as well too. But again, it's a competition where we'll have to see. Can they get a TV deal?
Apparently, they've got something cooking. I mean, they've copyrighted Tuesday Night Dynamite as the name of a show, so maybe we'll get a Tuesday Night Wars. But, if they can get a decent network, not pop,
that's
something nobody has, But apparently the rumors now are that Ted Turner may be looking to drum up the Monday Night War again and put them on TNT or TBS. I think TBS is what the rumor is right now. That would be amazing.
Well, that's what they need, right? They need something that anyone can access. Anyone that's got the basic of cable, where it's like you spend like $30 a month and that channel's going to be on there. That's what we need, is that type of war. Is because even though cable, for the most part, is dying, it ain't dead. A lot of people still watch cable, and if not that, there's always streaming services as well too that will lend into this, that lend into Nielsen ratings, and I mean DVR too. Nielsen does track DVR recordings as well. So even if they don't watch it live, if it is actually live, it's still a great thing. But yeah, if they can do that, if they can actually, if they want to do the Tuesday Night Dynamite, that's cool. The thing about it is, with SmackDown, it's leaving USA and it's going to Fox.
Oh, Fridays,
and so that'll be on Fridays. It seems. We were talking about this last week. I actually think a sort of fun thing. I think this is probably a stupid idea, yet it could be an amazing idea. What if there was a WWE Monday Night Civil War? All right, go with me on this.
Right.
It would be tough, but it basically be when SmackDown moves to Fox. At some point, when after Friday, they can move to a Monday. So you literally have SmackDown versus Raw. You've got Raw on USA. You got SmackDown on Fox at the same time, and they literally compete. They always talk about how, it's kayfabe, but they always talk about how, we're competing against each other.
Right.
Well, no, you're not really. You're all part of the same company. It's all going to the same thing.
Yeah.
But this would actually give that actual distinct competition. Now, you'd have to actually have probably different writers, right? If you're actually at the same time, you can't regurgitate. You can't see the same. You can't be like, there's a 6-man tag match, and then there's also another 6-man tag match in this, which they do already.
Yeah.
But it's split by one night, so you forget. I just watched it on Raw the night before,
Yeah.
So there's that as well too. So again, it's something that I think would be awesome. It would be amazing. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's realistic. It's just not realistic that something like that would happen.
Well, they'd never do that. That'd be really fun for fans. Really interesting to see. Raw versus SmackDown. directly.
Right. And from a no, exactly. And from a business standpoint too, you always want to expand. You never want to, as far as like merge if you can avoid it. You always want to keep expanding.
Sure.
And that's why that's what they've been trying to do, is expand throughout the week. So this way they've got Monday Night Raw, and then they've got Wednesday night for NXT. They've got Friday Night SmackDown.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think as a business you always want to expand. So I think there's that. Speaking of, it was great to see a Sunday Night Heat. Albeit a halftime show, but that was killer. That was a killer halftime show.
It was so great.
Speaking of a sort of a spot fest showcase of fun, it was great seeing all those. It was actually I preferred it over the actual halftime show itself. The kicker is I actually had to watch the halftime show just in the place I was at. Had to watch the halftime show itself, but I did watch Heat thereafter. It was
okay.
It was cool to see that. But yeah, no, I mean NXT, dude. I don't even know what to say. It is one of those things where I think that's actually the real competition to WWE.
It really could be. And I mean, a lot of people really do see NXT as a very, very separate product from Raw or SmackDown. No doubt about it. I mean, aside from the WWE branding everywhere and a little bit of the polish, you don't really get too much of a heavy traditional WWE feel. Like you were saying before, NXT has that indie show vibe. It's smaller. It's a more intimate venue. It's closer, and you get like just the feel of the fans. Like they're sometimes they're more rambunctious, or they're just more connected to the wrestlers because they're so close and because they're right there, and because a lot of them are there every week for the tapings. I'm sure you could call them competition, no doubt about it.
Yeah, you know what I like about NXT is that there's a couple things. It is the direct conduit to WWE, but a few things. You know how you look above the ring. You know how there's like that as far as like Titantron-esque screen.
Right.
I've always thought of it as like a portal to WWE.
Ah.
It's kind of one thing I always thought. It's considered the direct conduit, so it's like sort of this portal to WWE. The other thing too to consider is that NXT itself, again, kayfabe, actually has the most power in WWE, and I'll explain why. It's because they have the key to the future. What if Regal just decided not to let any more prospects go to Raw or SmackDown?
That would be really interesting if they did that, and maybe make it into a crossover event thing where Trips is because he's of both worlds, you could say, and he's torn between worlds. His support for NXT, and the fans know of his closeness to NXT, and that's his baby, and his how strongly connected he is with them. But of course, fans of course know about his main roster WWE stuff too. So that'd be really interesting to see. Man torn between worlds. Does he support his beloved NXT that he birthed, or does he show support for Vince and company?
Well, and I think too, and this is. Obviously, I'm not going to hurt wood when I say this, but I think when Triple H and Stephanie finally do take the reins, I think what we're seeing at NXT is essentially what we're going to see at a larger level at some point.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to see this type of style of wrestling.
Yeah.
There's a part for everyone. We're going to see the good guys lose, the bad guys win. We'll see vice versa. We're going to essentially see people that are just good at wrestling get over, I think. And I think, honestly, that's what I've seen with NXT. I think there's always going to be exceptions, but I feel like what they're doing now with the Performance Center at NXT, they've got that locked down. They're really developing wrestlers for the long haul. They look at wrestlers as products. They also look at them as people, which is why they're grooming them, getting them ready for the hectic WWE schedule and what comes with that. But yeah, no, NXT is the future. I love what they've done with NXT. And it is really kind of the sort of civil competition within. But again, I'm hoping for AEW. I'm hoping for AEW. I'm hoping everything that Cody Rhodes, the Young Bucks, and everyone else there at AEW. I hope that what they do is actually provide some competition to WWE. I really hope that they provide some legitimate competition to WWE, because that's going to make it better for everyone, not just wrestling, but the fans and everything all together.
And that's what gets me is Vince probably wouldn't admit it, but he really does need this. He's so isolated and so ensconced in his own WWE empire that he's built. He doesn't seem to even realize that you really do need this, Vince. You really do want them to be a competition for you. Because there's no way AEW is going to crush WWE. Let them take a little bit of the market share, because you'll find out you actually get a better product because your writers are being pushed and you have some kind of fire against you. And I would think that Vince, as a businessman and entrepreneur, that he'd at least be able to appreciate that on some level. But like we're hearing reports about people wearing AEW shirts at WWE events being asked to remove them, which honestly isn't that surprising. They've
By the
done
way,
similar things.
I've heard similar things with posters. I've heard that same thing. So what happens? They replace it with like a Roman Reigns T-shirt. Like what if someone has no shirt? Like what happens?
I think people are they're either encouraged to buy a shirt
or turn it
inside out.
Oh,
yeah, which I mean that's not too surprising. They've done that stuff in the past. But it's just kind of like, Vince, really, like how petty are you? Like you can do one of two things. You can defeat your competition by trying to stamp out every incident of them existing, or you can just do a better product.
Here's the thing. I think that he's going to still want to do a better product, but he's got his interests at play here. And at the end of the day, I would do the same darn thing.
Yeah.
When it comes to competition, I would buy it and destroy it.
It's just
overall, because for the fan, for the consumer, It's better. But as a company, honestly, a company wants to be the monopoly, right? There's no competition, you get all the money. So I get where he's coming from, but at the end of the day, I want AEW to be legitimate. I think it is so far. It seems like
on paper,
and they've got the funding too. That's the other thing too. And these TV deals, I mean, it's all going to come down to the TV deals.
Yeah,
it's all going to come down to whatever TV deals they got, but. Hey, who knows? But yeah, no, we're going to be back 2 weeks from now. We're going to do another podcast. Make sure you get your tickets for AEW Pro. Also, huge announcement. Now, listen, not only do we get microphones, I have an idea. I have a huge idea. We're talking about competition, right? We're talking about NXT versus WWE. We're talking about WCW versus WWE.
That's
We're
right.
talking about AEW versus WWE. What about Josh and Josh Talk Wrestling versus WWE? Hear me out. I have an idea. And this is going to be a first ever. We're not going to take on WrestleMania. But in April, Josh and Josh Talk Wrestling, we're going to challenge the WrestleMania kickoff show. We are going to do a podcast during the kickoff show before WrestleMania.
There you go. Yes.
Huge announcement. I didn't check in with you.
Excitement. I didn't even know about this.
You didn't. I wanted to check in with
surprised.
You. I made an executive decision. Because it's 50-50, right? I made an executive decision on this one.
Let's do it.
We're going to take on the WrestleMania kickoff show in April.
We're taking
you on. The kickoff show will be WrestleMania versus Josh and Josh Talk Wrestling.
That's right.
All right. We'll see you guys soon, all right?
Look for us on Facebook, Josh and Josh Talk Wrestling. On Twitter, Josh and Josh TW. And send us an email, why don't you, at joshandjoshtalkwrestling@gmail.com.
Stay cool, everyone. We love y'all.
Good night, everybody.